Hey everyone, we are back and it has been far too long. I have missed my chat sessions with Lauren, Little Miss Funeral. So let's welcome her back. Yay!
Yay!
So in her green screen, I really want her husband to turn her green screen into something behind her. So we'll see if that happens.
I know, we have to ask him if he can. So he's pretty good at editing.
Like Star Wars? I don't know.
I know I'll be on the Millennium Falcon or something like
Yeah.
that. No, we can't actually we can't trust this to Josiah because who knows what he's gonna put behind me.
Yeah, it's totally gonna be sci-fi or, something crazy. Well, we've narrowed it down today. We're gonna do 3 questions or 3 submissions. A couple of them have multiple parts, but it'll make for a little bit better, concise questioning. And our first question is just pretty basic. Someone asked if we see a higher rate of suicide among funeral professionals. What is your first kind of response or thought to that?
So where I practice, it's a very, I would say, tight-knit group. A lot of, you basically know all the funeral directors within my community, within my area. So I don't think that I see like a high rate of suicide. I think I see a high rate of depression or maybe substance abuse. And I'm not, saying necessarily
Right.
of my friends and families who are funeral directors, but I'm just saying like as a generalization between funeral professionals, I think that it's a hard job to do. It's a hard job to digest. And I think a lot of funeral directors get through it sometimes with not healthy habits.
No, I agree. I can't think of a lot of instances of suicide that I know. I know one dear man that I had gotten to know through one organization, and he did kill himself. I don't know what else was going on though. There could have been a whole big other story about his life that I just wasn't in tune with because he lived across country and I wasn't super close, but I really liked him. Otherwise, I don't really know many others who have committed suicide.
I have 2 in my personal group of professionals who have committed suicide, but quite honestly, I don't know if it's because they were funeral directors or because they were fighting demons within their life. And what I mean by that is if they weren't a funeral professional, I think that they possibly would have ended up the same route just because they had their own issues that they were dealing with.
Yeah. Well, that's like you said, I think I see more substance abuse, whether it's alcoholism or other whatever drugs that people may go on. Back pain is huge within our business because of all the lifting, moving and things, and where you start on some medication for that and it kind of snowballs and you become an addict to whatever medications are on hand. So I see that, I think, more. What profession would you say you see a lot of suicide? Because we see the result of by caring for the families. What if you had to say a profession that you saw high suicide rate?
Veterans. I see actually a lot of veterans who come through the funeral home, and ones who have been active duty and then come back to citizen life and don't know how to adjust to that.
Mm-hmm.
That my husband and I actually every year we go to a dinner that supports our local Western New York veterans, just because it's a huge issue with these men and women who are serving our countries, and they're seeing things and they're doing things in the line of duty to help us live free, and when they come back to what we call a normal life, they just can't adjust.
That's veterans are a great one. I've also seen a lot with police officers, and I think anybody who takes in a lot of visual and emotional with their job in trauma and such, EMTs, first responder type people, I see that we get more with those type of professions when it comes to suicide or accidental overdoses where maybe they've medicated for something along the lines and then it just snowballs type thing. We're kind of going through the gamut of professions, that's the only one that really may be repetitive. Otherwise, it's kind of all over the place. So Ashley has written, she says, I am currently a student studying senior living. I'm interested in switching to funeral service. I'm concerned that if I get through the lecture, I'll not be able to embalm the deceased. Did you find many students aren't able to complete the embalming? What is your thought on that?
I have the exact same fears.
Mm.
As somebody who personally does not like live blood, that is what I call like a living person who is bleeding. You know, like if I'm at a family party, if somebody gets a paper cut, I don't do well in those situations. I would have never made a good nurse or a good doctor because I can't deal with a living person who is hurt. So the embalming process was a huge, huge concern for myself because quite frankly, I didn't know if I'd be able to stomach it. So what I ended up being able to do, thankfully, while I was still in high school, I had a family friend who was a funeral director, and he actually allowed me to sit in on an embalming and observe it prior to me going to school. Now, I do realize that not everybody has the same opportunity, but what I can tell from personal experience is that it's not as bad as people make it out to be. It's not this gruesome, morbid, horrible event that we're doing to a person. It's just not as bad as you think it is. When you're embalming, you're actually kind of, you get into this zone of this is the job that I have to do, and you're kind of focusing on the next task rather than the fact that that's a deceased person in front of you. So I don't know. I guess without doing it, it's difficult to explain maybe, but it's definitely a concern, but it's not, you can do it. Absolutely, you can do it.
That's, I think until you get in and you do it, you can't base it off the first time either. I say you got to go 5, 6, 7, multiple times for your mind and your body to actually understand what you're seeing, because we've been trained to understand that if there is blood, there is pain. And so to understand that if we're looking at blood and we're looking at things happening to an individual, that there's not pain associated with that because the person is dead. And so we have to retrain our brains and our minds to understand those things. So you definitely have to give it a few times, and you're going to find either you're interested in it and you're intrigued and you want to know more and you want to understand it more, or you're even more turned off by it and more repulsed by it. And that's okay. That's why some states have different licenses. That's why some states you can be a funeral director and not be licensed as an embalmer, or you do just enough to get through and get your license, and then you never work in the prep room again because you work at a large enough facility that you just make arrangements and you run funerals. So you don't have to be an embalmer if that's an area you don't want to work in. You don't have to be licensed to work at a funeral home. That's one thing I always talk about is people really are interested in the business, but you don't have to get your funeral director's license to work in the funeral home. You could do pre-funding, you could do aftercare, you could do, associate work where you're working visitations, funerals, death certificates, graphics, office work, all these other areas where you're still helping the family, you're still interacting, you're still engaging them. You can even do arrangements in some states if you're not licensed. So you can do a lot of the aspects without even going to mortuary school. You just have to find the right funeral home fit for you, I guess. She also asks, are funeral homes generally one-person operations, or how large must they become before they hire more full-time staff? This is a really broad question. Like, I was actually talking to a guy today, and they do about 55 calls a year, and there's 2 full-time licensed people because of how they run the funeral home. That's not typical that that small of a funeral home would have 2 people, but that's how they run it. And they do a lot of burial, very little cremation. So they have higher revenue coming in so they can pay 2 people. But you might get to a 150, 200 person volume funeral home and only have 1 licensed director and some part-time staff. So it's, I don't know, it's kind of different all across the board as to what kind of staff and how you use your staff. You may not need a licensed person if you have an arranger that's not licensed. So you have different areas. What is it like where you're at, Lauren?
Well, I worked for a funeral firm that did 120 calls a year. We had 3 licensed funeral directors on staff, 1 full-time office manager on staff, and a whole handful of part-timers who would do calling hours, funerals, run death certificates, and 3 licensed funeral directors for 120 calls. Once again, that's, some would say maybe, I don't want to say overkill because I feel like that's not a good term to use for funerals, but still, it's a lot for that amount of work. But this funeral home was so detailed. I mean, we customized everything, where doing one funeral from start to finish, from printing prayer cards, register books, thank you cards, memorial candles, memorial DVDs, back panels. I mean, when I say we customized everything, we customized everything. So we needed that help. So it's very different. Each funeral home runs differently. Each funeral home has different services that they offer.
Right.
So it really is hard to kind of gauge that. I find that I like both scenarios now that I have kind of worked on both ends of the spectrum within my career. There were certain aspects of my job that I really loved kind of being on my own working because I could trust myself and I knew what I was capable of, and I knew that I was getting everything done because I didn't really have to talk to other people. It was stressful at times and it was difficult at times, but at the end of the day, I knew that I was going to get everything done and I didn't have to rely on anybody else. Working in a funeral setting where you have teammates and other people that you have to rely on, it definitely takes the stress of the workload off of you. But at the same time, if communication is not fully there, that can leave room for error, which is not good for anybody. So I think that it's good to work under both situations if you have the choice, just because that way you can see what you like better, because every funeral home is different.
Yeah, very much. Just like at your funeral home, 120 calls, you could have 3 funeral directors, but you were the ones actually doing all of the office work. I mean, you guys were doing the paperwork, you were doing the videos, you were doing the printing, whereas you could have one director and then you could have office staff who are doing all the printing, the videos, kind of the managing of all of that other kind of the office side of things rather than a licensed funeral director. So you could swing, it depends how you work your numbers and run your business, because you know your licensed funeral director is, or most of the time, is going to make more, so you're going to have more expense than you would for maybe an office graphics person to do that whole side. So you could, it depends on your revenue and the types of calls you do, and everything's going to be different with every single funeral home, unfortunately, but hopefully that gives a good broad answer to what we're saying. So I got an email also from Christine, and she talks about her dad died 3.5 years ago. And she said, I'm still grieving my dad. People can't understand why. I go to your videos. I go to watch a lot of videos and listen to questions and answers because they bring her comfort. Is it okay that I'm still grieving? Is it okay that I'm interested in funeral homes and find comfort in videos and hearing what you have to say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to grief, there's no timeline that it comes down to. Nobody knows the relationship between you and your father. Nobody knows the connection that you had, how many times a day you would call him, what you would go to him for support. So when you lose somebody that instrumental in your life, of course, there's going to be a void. And grief isn't something that as soon as you bury a person, you get up the next day and then life is back to normal. You're constantly finding your new normal. So if somebody tells you that you should be over it by now, you can just hit them in the face because they're wrong.
We're not advocating, harm to others, but violence is not the end.
But throw coffee in their face.
Yeah.
No, I'm
Take
totally
away
kidding.
Their coffee.
Please do not give me hate for saying that.
But if you will throw coffee, let it be Tim Hortons.
Please sponsor me. Thank you.
No, it is, grief. If the time when you need to be concerned with grief is when you are immobilized, paralyzed, stuck in your grief. If after 3.5 years, if after a year, you're not getting out of bed, you're not going to work, you've cut off relationship ties with friends, with family, you're not taking care of yourself, you are stuck. That point, you need help. You need to seek somebody who can help you in a healthy way process the loss that you're living through, to help you grieve, to help you do things that are healthy for you and for your life moving forward, or else you essentially have given up on living as well, which I'm sure there's days you want to feel like you want to give up on life because you don't want to go on without that person that you love and that person that was so, magnanimous in your life. But 3.5 years is fine if you're still grieving. If you have a breakdown when you see their favorite cereal in the grocery store once in a while, that's fine, because you're always and forever going to be pained by that loss. But as long as it's not controlling you and limiting you, then you're moving in a healthy path. And I think that I say this a lot, we were not made to understand death and to process it. It wasn't part of our genetic makeup when we were created. And so we are always curious and interested in trying to figure it out. And when we can't understand a loss, especially if it's the first big loss in our life, we're searching for an answer that you may never find the exact answer, but to understand the process, understand maybe something that happened, understand what your loved one went through in the process, then it might bring you some answers, like you've said, and some comfort and some knowledge so that you can maybe push that off the plate into the garbage away from, what's bothering you and controlling you, and you can maybe move forward somehow. And maybe you just feel connected by a lot of the other people that watch the videos, because it's very common. I mean, Lauren, how often are you getting messages from people that say, I just lost somebody, or I am in grief because this person died a year or 2 or 10 or 20 years ago, and I'm looking for answers, and they happen upon your video?
I feel like that happens quite often. I'm getting like comments daily on my YouTube channel on old videos that I even post, because the thing is that when you lose somebody that you love, there's not a lot of resources out there. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why like people like you, me, Joelle, the grave woman, and the modern mortician, and Caitlin Doty, all these people put out these videos because we're trying to just put out education options for people. And then when you lose somebody you love, it's like not a lot of people know what you're going through, right? So maybe you go onto Google and type in a question, and then these videos pop up, and then in the comment sections below you're going to be seeing other people who are commenting, and they're like, I just lost my loved one too. And there's almost that comfort in knowing that you're not alone in this, even though they may not know exactly what you're going through. There is somebody out there who's also hurting. So in a weird way that can bring you comfort, and there's nothing wrong with that either.
You don't feel abnormal. You don't feel like what you're feeling is weird or odd or worrisome. Like you don't need to go commit yourself tomorrow because you're still feeling sad, 3 weeks later, or however long later. It's okay. One thing she did ask us to talk through just a little bit is the steps once a person dies to get to the funeral home. So kind of that, they were from point A to point B, kind of how does that all transpire?
What are we going to use as our point A, like home, hospital?
Yeah, let's do a home hospice death.
Home hospice death.
Let's say Bob is home, dying at home with hospice care.
I asked that question just because every scenario is a tad different.
A little bit, yeah.
Not vastly different, but just maybe 1 or 2 steps different. So for home hospice care, the very first step would be to call your hospice nurse or hospice doctor. They would have to come to the home to actually pronounce a person. There's no need for a medical examiner to come to the home in this situation because the death was expected. And then what happens is once the person is pronounced deceased, the funeral home can be called. Typically, that is done, I would say, within an hour or two, or depending how long a family would like to keep their loved one at home. There are some people where they want to keep their loved one with them for an hour or two to get other family members or friends, or just so they can do maybe some washing of the body or some different rituals that are important to them. Then the funeral home would come to the home. They would take them into our care. And what we mean by take them into our care, we would place them on a stretcher or a reeves or some sort of device where we could put them then in the van or hearse or whatever sort of removal or transfer vehicle we are using. And then we drive them to the funeral home. Did I cover it all, Kari? I don't mean to be laughing at this either, but I'm looking at your face and I'm like, maybe I'm missing a step over here.
No, I think it's a lot simpler than maybe people wonder about. I don't know anybody who brings in, a body bag and places the person in a body bag and zips them up. When you see that on movies, that's because they're going to the coroner or the medical examiner. So they need to put them in a body bag or pouch to lock the zipper. So that way if there's any evidence, it's not, contaminated and the person is sealed up and then they're taken away. Funeral homes may bring, a cot to the nursing home or wherever they go that has it's pouch style where it does zip up fully over, but a lot of people have switched over to the quilts or just cot cover that goes up and over the deceased. A lot of times if I'm in a place where there's not a lot of eyes on you, I will leave the person's face uncovered. If it's middle of the night, I may leave their face uncovered to kind of go out to the van or the coach, just because I don't feel like I need to cover the person's face and like hide the fact that somebody has died. And, if it was my loved one, I don't want them just like something tight up over their face. To me, that always has felt a little awkward. But yeah, it's sometimes to a house, there's always two people usually will go to a home to, place the person on the cot, because we never know if we have stairs, if we're in a back bedroom, if we have a lot of lifting to do, if there's anybody there that can even help us. But if we go to a nursing home or a hospital, often there may just be one staff member that goes. It depends on the area. You may have staff from the funeral home, or they may call a removal service if there is a removal service, and that's their job. If they just go pick up a deceased from point A and deliver them to point B, to a funeral home or wherever. And so, it may not be the funeral home staff that's actually coming to the place of death. It may be a third-party company that the funeral home is hired to do that process. And that could be because they're tied up on another call, or that's who they use at night because they want their staff to be home resting at night. But it's a 24/7 business, whether it's 2 a.m, 2 p.m, the funeral home will send out someone to come bring that person into their care. They may go into a cooler when they get to the funeral home if they don't know about embalming or cremation. So they might wait until the morning to call the family if the family's not there. So everybody doesn't have a cooler though. They may go and just be placed on the table in the preparation room. So that part is going to be vastly different depending on the funeral home and the setup and how they kind of do things, time of day. If it's 2 p.m, I might put the person on the table rather than in the cooler, because we'll probably get an answer quickly about embalming or cremation. So every scenario is a little different, like Lauren said, between how many go, what you take, where they are when they're brought back to the funeral home. If the death is in a hospital, they take them down to the morgue. They're not left in the hospital room usually. And so we go to the morgue, which is the nondescript door in some weird side hallway that you get to when you park by the dumpster out behind the back, where you have to come in some weird doorway, maneuver down a hallway, go to the secret door, and then get let into, to get the person out, because nobody dies at a hospital, right? So we can't.
That's the most accurate way that you've ever described
anything.
Literally, that
so
is it.
True. And then you get the security. Usually you call security, and that's who will let you in. And a lot of
After
this,
30 minutes, they show up.
yes, and a lot of
If
times
you're a security guard watching this, I'm sorry, get there quicker.
I like the security staff, but a lot of times they don't want to help you. They don't want anything to do with the dead bodies. They don't want anything to do with dead bodies, anything to do with the morgue. They want it to be as anonymous and not there as the hospital does. And so it's always, and it is kind of a joke. And that's why we giggle a little, is because it is a joke, because you do go to almost every hospital and you enter through out by the loading docks, the dumpster, some weird random side door that you have to have 6 badges to get through. It's never seen or talked about or in the front, even though birth and death all happens at a hospital. It's just hidden in secret. So yeah, hospitals are kind of a thing all their own, aren't they? Quite interesting. But oh, cool. Well, those are our questions. I'm glad, I feel like we could talk a little more about each question without having fewer questions today. So I think next time we'll do the same, just a couple questions to get through, because it's fun to dive into them a little bit deeper with Lauren and chat about them. So thank you guys for joining us. If you have some questions for Little Miss Funeral and I for our next edition, which we'll try and make happen a lot sooner than the last ones have happened. I feel like we fell off the face of the earth. I don't even want to know what we did the last
fell off
one.
the face of the earth, but you have been doing wonderful, by the
way. I show up. I show up in batches, I feel like, where all of a sudden I have a bunch and then I'm like just trying to make ends meet. And then, oh, here I am again. And yeah, well,
life of a funeral director. So.
Yes, the ebb and flow, I tell you. So thanks guys for joining us, and we'll see you at the next video. Bye.